Hey church, I hope you're enjoying this first part of summer. And as we look at the Psalms together as a church, I wanted to share one with you that I especially love. It's Psalm 114, just 8 verses, so let's read it together. It says, "When Israel came out of Egypt, the house of Jacob, from a people who spoke a foreign language, Judah became his sanctuary, Israel his dominion. The sea looked and fled. The Jordan turned back. The mountains skipped like rams, the hills like lambs. Why was it, sea, that you fled? Jordan, that you turned back, mountains that you skipped, like rams, hills like lambs. Tremble, earth, at the presence of the Lord, at the presence of the God of Jacob, who turned the rock into a pool, the flint into a spring." Now, I love this poem because the psalmist is doing something here that the Bible tells us all to do, especially in moments when we're confronted with fears, doubts, or challenge. The psalmist is remembering what God has done, remembering the days of old, not forgetting who he is or the story of God's people. This psalm is reflecting on the book of Exodus, the story of how God brought his people up out of Egypt and into the promised land. When he did, the Red Sea blocked their way out, and so God parted those waters. And later in the book of Joshua, he parts the waters of the Jordan River. And so the psalm reflects on this and says, the sea looked and fled, and the Jordan turned back. The image is of actually the waters not just parting, but running from the presence of God. And that's because waters in the Bible often symbolize chaos and things that are out of our control and things that are even threatening. Think about the ocean and how it can feel that way. And yet, God's presence, those things, they move out of the way. Chaos has to run. And instead, in its place, there's an ordered way forward for God's people. Now, in verse 4, the mountains skip like rams and the hills are running. And as God's people move through the wilderness, he meets with them on Mount Sinai. And the very most immovable things, perhaps, in all of creation, the mountains, they shake, reminding us of God's power. Then the psalmist feels the audacity to ask creation, "What's wrong with you? Why are you doing this?" And he ends the psalm by looking at the story, both in Exodus and in Numbers, of how Moses strikes a rock and water flows out. In a dry place, when God's people are weary and thirsty, he provides water from an unexpected source, a rock. And in John 19, when John is writing about Jesus' death, he tells us that a soldier stabbed Jesus in the side when he was on the cross dying. And what came out of Jesus? But water. This is all a reminder for us here and now that what God has done for us stands in history as a reminder that he provides in unexpected ways, in surprising ways, and that he is more powerful than the forces that we feel opposing us. And so here's my challenge to you. Think about your own story. God has been faithful to you, church. Remember the days of old and let those move you. In your own experience, let them move you today to worship God for who he is and what he'll do next.